municipality, that's not worth the trouble to have your own municipal water system. But several municipalities could join together and have their own water system, and that's much more just than having a private company charge whatever it wants or whatever it can get the regulators.
That's what we have here. I'm in a small town of 900 in Oakland, Illinois, and of course, all of my growing up years here, we got our water out of our lake, our local lake, the Oakland Lake. And but it was never very deep. So over a period of years, the mud and the silt and everything built up like 3 foot deep, and there was no way to get rid of it. They tried with something called a mud cat for 20 years, and it didn't work. So eventually we had to hook into a system north of us about 60 miles. So that's where our water comes from now. And, of course, now it's, compared to what it was, it's expensive. You know, it's $51 a month for me. And I live alone. And fortunately, I can afford that. But, I remember when I was a kid, and it was, of course, $8 a month.
And part of that is there are expenses, but the thing of it is when government does it, the profits go back into the government. So what you have is a system where you license somebody to charge to do it for you, and it's not a free enterprise system. It's not like different people are competing to bring you water. There's only one water delivery system.
Yeah, we didn't have any choice. Our water's gone.
Yeah, so you get you don't get the benefits of free enterprise, which is what you would get. If you were just like if you buy bottled water is expensive because it's bottled water, but you can buy bottled water from different companies. But to have water delivered, there's only one delivery system. So you are stuck with a licensed monopoly.
Yeah. But I look at it this way. I lived in the country for 30 years and just recently moved back to Oakland in March. Well, in the country, my water came out of my pond. I had a filtration system, but about once every 3 to 4 to 5 years, I'd have to have the carbon rebedded or a filter fixed or something. I had to have my waterman come in, and it could cost anywhere from between $500 to $1,000. So actually, moving to town, I've saved money in the long run.
What about if you had all those years from the time when you was drinking water out of the lake up until the time you couldn't, which I suspect was about 40 years or so. If there had been zero population growth, you could still be drinking water out of that lake, right?
No. Actually, like I said, it's a town of 900. And it's pretty much always been a town of 900. The lake just went bad. When you've got 3 foot of silt in a 5 foot pond or a 5 foot lake, and you can't get rid of it, well, it doesn't work. You get a dry year, and really we just don't have any water here.
Okay, well, what about nationwide? I read somewhere that we'll run out of water in 30 years. We've only got enough water to last us 30 more years.
Well, not in Illinois. Where ours comes from, they have artesian wells. So, California, they're in a bad state in California, and I feel really bad for them because their water tables are damn near empty. And they say
corporations like Nestle that would love to privatize a lot of water too.
Oh yeah.
You think the California water problem has anything to do with population?
I think it mostly has to do with farm subsidies.
Yeah.
90% of the farming and 90% of the water is consumed for farming. The commercial and residential users only use 10%, and that means that they're.
Why do they have so much farming?
Well, because they subsidize it.
Well, and 60%, they claim that 60% of our fruits and vegetables come from California.
Yeah. But rice comes from California. Rice used to come from Louisiana. And, rice is a swamp crop. The right way to grow rice is to flood it and let it soak in the water. Then the rice grows up out of the water. And they grow rice in California. They grow alfalfa, which is a big water consumer. They grow, I forget what all, there was like 5 different crops that are.
Yeah, I read or heard a few years ago that they had to let about 250 acres go fallow because there was not enough water. And I believe they said it was for the almond trees that takes just an ungodly amount of water to grow. So they were taking water from under the ground, depleting their water tables.
Vineyards do the same thing. That the vineyards in California require an awful lot of water as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they said that once their water tables are gone, which they're getting close, they said it could take 100 years for them to come back up, if ever.
Around the turn of the 19th century, a westward expansion reached its limit. We reached the shores of the Mississippi, and from that time on, it became more crowded each year, and from about the 1950s on, the crowding really became a problem. In other words, the scarcity of resources began to show up, the oil and the this and that, the other. And what I'm saying is, the bankers that are a problem, and the insurance companies are a problem, but there's another problem, and that problem is urbanization and overpopulation, what Calhoun calls the behavioral sink. What do y'all think about that?
Well, I think part of it is when we don't charge the market rate for land and resources, people grab it up. And especially for resources, things like oil. I mean, we have all these arbitrary, crazy ideas like fuel efficiency standards for automobiles and stuff. And I grew up in the 60s, and I remember that we had these big muscle cars like GTOs and Camaros and stuff. And the Europeans...
GTOs, GTX.
Yeah. And the Europeans had...
And those things had to have sucked gas.
Yeah, they did. But the Europeans had things like Triumphs and MGs and a lot of
Mr. Bean cars.
Yeah, even the
like in France, they've got like Mr. Bean cars, and they really do have cars.
Yeah,
that small.
My point is that even the Jaguars were really powerful by European standards, but they used way less gas than our cars. And the reason was not that the government in Europe had any kind of regulations about fuel efficiency. It was that gasoline costs 2 or 3 times as much in Europe as it costs here. So if you just put a tax on oil consumption and an extra tax on gasoline because it pollutes, you end up without having any special rules about how fuel efficient your car has to be. You're going to end up with smaller, more fuel efficient cars because people will buy them that way. For a while the gas went up to $4.55 a gallon, and people couldn't sell their used SUVs, and the new SUVs were sitting on the lot, and the little fuel efficient cars were being snapped up because people didn't want a gas guzzler when a gallon of gas costs close to $5 a gallon. When the price
and of course
of gas,
around here now, everybody's got the great big huge SUVs.
Yeah,
everybody's got them.
Yeah, and I don't want to interfere with people's personal decision as long as they're paying the social costs.
No, that's fine, if that's what they want to do. But I'm not going to spend $50,000 for a vehicle.
Yeah, well,
but a lot of people
do. I don't buy new ones. I bought a new truck once, and I bought a new car once when I was young and making good money. But the thing is that people will automatically respond to price. And if the price of gas goes up and the price of, if they take less money out of your payroll tax and they charge higher for gasoline, then people will say, well, look, if I lived closer to where I worked, I'd come out ahead. Or if I got a more efficient car, I'd come out ahead. Or if I combined my trips, if I didn't drive to the store every time I need a loaf of bread, but I made a good shopping list and went less often and made sure I got everything I needed, I would use less gas, I would come out ahead. And those are the things people do automatically when gasoline is expensive. But when gasoline is cheap and the government's afraid to stand up to the oil companies, then what they do is they come up with these cockamamie ideas like average fuel efficiency standards. And they say, okay, your company makes cars, you have to have this average. And it didn't help because people said, well, if I buy a big car, I have to pay a gas guzzler tax to subsidize somebody's little Geo Metro. But the SUV is in a different category. So if I buy an SUV instead of a Chrysler Imperial, then I don't get that gas guzzler tax because the SUV category has a higher fuel efficiency standard anyhow. And those are the things that happen when you try to fix things with arbitrary rules. And so the idea that the early progressives had and that the Council of Georgist Organizations has, which is what I'm part of, is that you charge what the social costs are. You put it right in the price. And then you don't regulate people. You just let them do what they want to do. And if they want to, if you want to have a truck that gets 10 miles to the gallon, but you only drive 2 miles to work, then that's better than you're having this little fuel-efficient car that gets 40 miles to the gallon, but you're driving 70 miles to work. And there are people that do that. They're driving 70 miles to work. It's like, you should move there. Why do you go 70 miles every day each way? So
what I hear you saying is you're the lady in Illinois is liberal and you're a conservative. Is that what you're a market-based economy, and she's more socialist?
Well, the conservatives act like the market just works fine, and the liberals act like the market will never work. And what we say is the market works if you harmonize your laws with what you want. So the market doesn't work. I mean, if you just let people suck oil out of the ground and turn it into gasoline, they'll suck it out as quick as they can, and everybody have cheap gas until one day, all of a sudden, nobody has gas. But if you say we're going to put a tax of $4 a gallon on gasoline, so your gasoline is now, your gasoline now is in Pennsylvania where I am, it's under $3 a gallon. So if it became $7 a gallon, we would hate that, but we would use less gas. And that money you get from that tax on gas, you can cut people's payroll taxes so that they get a bigger paycheck. So then you're saying we're making it more efficient for people to use human labor, because human labor doesn't cost as much anymore because we're not taxing that. And it's more expensive to use fossil fuels. And so the market will adjust. So the original progressive idea was not that the market works just fine, leave it alone, and it was not that the market doesn't work and we have to control everything. It was you adjust your taxes to discourage the things you don't want and to encourage the things you do want. And we want more jobs. Nothing kills jobs like a tax on working. So you have all these payroll taxes, Social Security taxes, and things that
nothing kills jobs like machines.
Well, except the machine consumes natural resources, and if you tax the natural resources instead of taxing the payrolls, then there's what economists call a tax wedge, and a tax wedge is the difference between what the employer pays to hire you and what you take home to spend. And some of that tax wedge is deducted from your paycheck. Some of it is deducted from the employer's contribution to unemployment or Social Security. But that difference, if you cut that difference, wages will go up and employers' costs will go down, and they'll hire more people instead of using more machines. And that's the thing about machines is, okay, what does that machine run on? Well, it runs, first of all, what's that machine made of? Well, you had to consume a whole lot of fuel to produce the machine. It was made in the steel mills and machine parts and stuff. And then when you run the machine is using electricity. Well, what if electricity was more expensive? And what if the machine was more expensive because there was a tax on the iron ore and a tax on the coal that they used to melt the iron into steel? What if the taxes were on these things? Well, there are some places where you would still use a machine. I just had surgery. I just had robotic surgery. Instead of cutting a big hole into my abdomen so the surgeon could get his hands in there, they cut 3 little holes in, and the surgeon sat like he was playing a video game, and this robot went in and did what it had to do without putting big trauma into my body. And so there's some things that you will use a machine for regardless. Coal mining. I mean, it's great that coal miners are not getting black lung as much anymore because they have a machine that goes in there and, mines the coal and pulls it out, and then they just haul it, to where it's reasonable. There are some things that we need to automate for health and safety reasons. But in terms of
it also too cut the workforce.
It did.
For coal miners.
Right. So then
I'm not saying if it's good or it's bad. It's just
that's my point. It's not whether it's good or it's bad, but it's what's happening.
Yeah. That's just. I worked at a company for almost 40 years that everything we touched was a machine that worked, and it was great in the beginning.
There's a good side and a
but
downside.
Then as they got more and more computerized and electronic eyes and that sort of thing, it cut the crew size from 15 people on a line down to about 6.
Mm-hmm.
So there you're losing jobs because of machinery.
Yeah. Now, what if
technology has a good side and a bad side?
Yeah. Now, what if and the classical progressive thing is to maximize the good parts